creationists, because I think in order for this to happen, that's a lot of hurdles to get over for creation to happen. Thomas, you had a question. I'm sorry, wait a minute. What's that like? Right. This is something that you'll learn in high school, and it's they're adenosine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. I don't remember. All right. Next slide. Okay.
I hate those.
Can we play the video?
Why? What are those? Oh.
While we're getting the video ready,
acid into your eye and it hurts.
I kind of like this little insect, so. And I think for time's sake, well, we can play it. It's 4 minutes. I'm sorry we don't have popcorn.
Exploration Films. Check us out on the web at explorationfilms.com.
In the fall of 1971, I went to Baylor in Dallas and gave my first lecture. It was on the evolution of the tooth. And I talked about how these fish scales gradually migrated into the mouth and became teeth. And a couple of my students came to me after class that day and said, Dr. Martin, have you ever investigated the claims of creation science? Well, that was 1971. I'd never even heard of it. And so I'm thinking to myself, where are these guys coming from? I've never heard of this. And so I said, sure, I'll look into this with you. And I'm thinking, kind of as a cocky young professor, I'll blow these guys away. Well, they asked me to start studying the assumptions that the evolutionists made. And in all my years, 8 years of scientific education, I have never had a single professor tell me about an assumption. And so we started looking at the assumptions, and I began to realize they're making some claims here that really the assumptions aren't valid. And then they asked me to start studying some animals and see if I thought that animal could evolve. Well, the first thing that we really studied together was this little bug called vomiter beetle. And this little insect, it's about a ½ inch long, and it mixes chemicals that explode. So I began to think, okay, now how would that evolve? Let's say if evolution is true, and you're evolving along here, and you don't have a defense mechanism, because that is the defense mechanism of the bug. So if evolution is true, it had to somehow evolve that. So let's say it's coming along here. Well, the first time it evolves the explosion, what does it do to the bug? Boom, it just splattered your bug, okay? So splattered bug pieces don't evolve. So I thought, how could this have happened? Well, it doesn't blow itself up. It has another little factory inside itself that manufactures chemicals. A chemical acts as a catalyst, so that when you squirt that chemical in with these other chemicals that are like in neutral, you get your explosion. Well, the first time it manufactured that little chemical, here it goes again, blew itself up again. But it doesn't. Why? Well, because it has like an asbestos-lined firing chain. And even then it blew itself up if it didn't have somewhere for the explosion to go. So it has twin tail tubes. And it can aim these tail tubes all the way up, out the side, out the front. Let's say a spider is coming up toward its side, and it doesn't have time to turn around and shoot. It can just take its little gun turret and get out there and shoot. Thus, the explosion on this little bug, all you hear, if you're listening as a human, you hear this pop. But scientists have now put that explosion in slow motion. And it's like about 1,000 sequential little explosions that they're so fast, all we hear is one pop. And so you think, well, why would that be? Well, that was a curious thing for the scientists that study this little bug. A lot of them are at Cornell University, some other places. And what they discovered was that if it was just one big pop, the little bug, if he's shooting like a spider, let's say over here, and he goes boom, bang, and shoots it, he's going to pop himself right out of it. It's like lighting a burner on a jet engine. So he's out of it. But as long as it is a sequential explosion with his little legs, he can hang on. How would evolution explain a sequential explosion? This little bug messes with all the theories of evolution. There is no way a slow, gradual process is going to produce this bug. There's no way, even the newest theories of evolution, like punctuated equilibrium, which means evolution happens very fast. Well, there's no way that will explain this little bug. I began to realize, how could this particular little animal, for instance, evolve? it needed all of its parts. It needed everything there all at once, or you just don't have the animal. And my stomach started to churn, if I really want to be honest. And my wife would tell you, my stomach churned for 5 years. It took a 5-year struggle for me to begin to flip the way I think, from thinking in an evolutionary way to thinking in more this animal, or little creature, little bug, whatever, was created fully formed, just like it is. Because that went against everything I'd ever learned.
Exploration films, where curious truths and uncommon minds meet.
Can I get somebody to get those lights? Just curious, how many of you can do what the bombardier beetle can do?
Funny. Real funny. Do what? How many can do what the bombardier
Some of us have more
do?
skills when it comes to that than others.
I mean, that's just
You've ever
crazy.
seen the spleen
I can't.
in
It's called
Mystery
peeing.
Man? He has skills along those
Man,
lines.
that's crazy. It's farting.
What I think is interesting about this bombardier beetle situation, right? I know, we should probably milk that comedy a little more. But, how are we doing on time for baptism?
Yeah, go.
Okay. What I think is interesting about this is that you have 2 tanks, and inside those tanks, they're made up of cells, okay? And each tank has cells lining it, and remember those simple cells? They're producing chemicals from that cell, and they're putting it into these 2 tanks, okay? Then they release that mixture into a 3rd tank, and lining that tank is a bunch of cells, and inside that tank is something called a catalyst. If you have 2 chemicals, it doesn't really matter, they're harmless. But when you mix them with a 3rd chemical, it creates an explosion. There is a special muscle inside there that opens and closes 2,000 times per second. So remember how I was saying this? What I thought was interesting is that's what air brakes do, or anti-lock brakes. If you slam on your brakes, your car will slide right off the road. But if it vibrates and shatters, it keeps your car from skidding. Same exact principle, but here we see this chattering, releasing of this pressure, so that it doesn't blow the insect off the side of the road. Not only the muscle in the little opening and closing, but the tanks themselves have muscles wrapped around them to keep a constant pressure on them. So the thinking behind this is here, listen to me carefully about this. Macroevolution, you all know the difference, right? Macroevolution says that by random events that came about without any kind of design or any kind of instruction from God, that it came about over billions and billions of years by chance happening and chance happening. And I just say, I want to learn more about that theory. Did you see that switch? Rather than saying, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, you switch it to a much more friendly, just say, I really want to learn more about what you're saying. How did that happen? Is there proof? Is there evidence? Yes.
There was an article on Yahoo this past week, and it was a scientist saying that they were going to eliminate God because they were about to figure everything out. And I read through this article because, you know, the headlines was catching. And this scientist really thinks that they're about to figure everything out. So I scrolled down to see all the comments because that's the most interesting part. And there was a scientist on there that said, the fact that you just said that we're about to figure everything out when I know we're nowhere close to figuring everything out makes me want to look at creation. So it was like a flip-flop of what you're saying, because this guy, you know, he was like, it's kind of just the opposite, well, the same, but on the flip side of what you're saying. He was saying to one of his colleagues, because you think you know everything, and I know we don't know near, you know, anywhere close to that, makes me want to look at this again. So.
One of the things that, and I'm opening this up to you guys, I would love for us to reverse the way the culture looks at the debate between creation and evolution. And I would love to figure out some way